I'm really honored to be talking to you, Bob, today. It's an extraordinary opportunity. Thank you so much for attending. Could you please introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
Hi, I'm Bob Sinclair. I'm a consultant to multinational corporations, and I'm an advisory director to an international consortium that's targeting sustainable mining, which is a misnomer because no mines are sustainable. They eventually run out of ore. But it really means socially responsible mining, so that you don't leave an environmental footprint, you don't pollute the water table, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm also a research scientist, and I spent much of my life as a tenured professor at 3 different universities in North America. I was trained as an experimental psychologist, and mostly aside from a theoretical side of my life, where I studied how we feel affects how we think, and I spent 30 years doing that. I also had my fingers in the consulting pie along the way, and I'm a research methodologist and statistician. And so when the lockdown occurred, I started following COVID-19. And it's not like I was an expert at COVID-19, but now I am. I went up the learning curve very quickly. I mean, I had nothing better to do with my time. And so I just started tracking data, and I went, wow, there's something wrong out there. These people are doing it wrong. So.
Yeah, so let's explore that in detail. Does the world understand COVID-19 correctly?
No. I mean, here's the issue, is that people have been collecting the wrong data. And I just published a paper where I slap the CDC and Health Canada and the WHO because they're collecting the wrong data. The curve that they talk about is a fairy tale, okay? In fact, I got to cite Shakespeare in the paper that I wrote. I said, the curve is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, from Macbeth's soliloquy upon the death of Lady Macbeth. I thought it was apt because, plus, I've never got to cite Shakespeare in a scientific paper before, so it was fun. Anyway, the problem is, you test people who have symptoms, right? And most of the people who have symptoms test positive. And you test frontline workers, and a lot of them get exposed, so a lot of them test positive. And then you test the kind of people who sort of want to get tested. Well, that doesn't represent the population. That's a biased sample. It doesn't represent the population at all. So using that as a proxy measure for infection rate is absolutely ludicrous. It's stupid. And that's what the epidemiologists are doing. And that's why I slapped them really hard in this paper. In fact, I took a line out. The line was, with a PhD in epidemiology and $4.50, you should be able to get yourself a latte, sit in a corner, be quiet, and let the real scientists do the work. They want to create these models, right? Instead of actually looking at objective data. And there really are objective data out there for you to look at. And those data they're right in front of our faces. They're deaths per million, okay? And, you know, this is much easier than dreaming up their assumptions. The epidemiologists' assumptions are based on unreliable data, and therefore they're not valid. And on top of it, they're making assumptions that they dream up in the night. So why don't we take an objective measure, and let's just take the number of COVID deaths and divide it by the population, and that gives us death per million. We got a pretty good idea about COVID deaths. There's some variance there, okay? Like the US might be over-reporting, other countries might be under-reporting, but at least it's real data. It's not stuff that you're just dreaming about. And so I started tracking this. And then I started complaining because they weren't, the curve was garbage. So what they should have been doing is random sample testing from the beginning. And random sample testing is not biased. And when you think about it, people who do public opinion polls, so if you're going to be a smart scientist, what you do is you think outside the box and you borrow methods from other areas of science. And I've done that all my life. So I looked at this, I said, look, these people doing public opinion polls can predict the outcome of a presidential election in the United States within 3 percentage points of reality, with a sample of 320 people, okay? And there's a lot more variability in those data than the outcome of a COVID test, because people might change their mind between the time that you actually poll them and when they vote. But COVID doesn't change its mind. You got it or you don't got it, right? I really should have said you have it or you don't have it, but I'm trying to talk more. Let's just get down to brass tacks here. So if we'd done random sample testing, and along with that, we get some demographic information, age data, sex, area of the country, et cetera, we would know. And if every country did this, okay, like in Canada, you'd need a very small sample. There's under 38 million of us. In the US, you'd need a larger sample, 300 in the US, maybe 250 in Canada, okay? Do this every week or every 2 weeks. It's very easy to do. You mail it out, people take the tests, they mail them back, and you process the tests. And plus, we'd have the demographic information and maybe a few attitudinal items like, what do you think about mask use? What do you think about physical distancing? Blah, 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 blah. We'd know exactly the infection rate. We would know exactly what the infection rate is. We would know exactly the percentage of the population that's asymptomatic and walking around shedding the virus. So idiots are advising governments on how to deal with a crisis, and they're collecting the wrong data because, look at 98% of in North America, we've deified doctors. I'm not quite sure why. Good doctors are good at diagnostic problem solving, and bad doctors are bad at diagnostic problem solving. Just like good plumbers and good electricians, and bad plumbers and bad electricians, okay? Diagnostic problem solving is their gig. Now, maybe we deify the doctors more because it's our lives they're dealing with. However, only about 2% of these people are actually scientists, okay? And so the other thing you need to put into perspective, and I'm particularly angry about the epidemiologists, is that not all, but most of these people were not successful enough in graduate school to get an academic job. So second and third grade epidemiologists are advising the CDC, the WHO, and Health Canada, and whatever your health agency is in Egypt, okay, this is what's going on. And all they want to do is develop models instead of looking at real data, and they don't think outside the box. Now, the people like at the CDC, okay, you've got some of the best virologists in the world, but I'm not convinced that their epidemiologists are particularly good. Now, the doctors that are in charge, and like these doctors that do work in infectious diseases, some of them are actually research scientists associated with research hospitals, so they do real science. But some of them are just relying on the epidemiologists to provide them with information so they can try and make judgments. But the judgments that they're making are only as good as the information that's provided to them by the epidemiologists, which I think is just dead wrong because the epidemiologists don't know what they're talking about. Anyhow, so where would I go with this? Well, I'd be advocating, you know, this random sample testing. We should be doing it every week or every 2 weeks, and we should continue to do it. And, you know, I'm going to, you know, I'll tell you some numbers here just for fun.
Yeah.
This is, I don't have an exhaustive set here, but this was just, you know, for discussion today. I just computed these. I'm not even going to bother talking about Spain, Italy, France, okay, because they're way up there. But the UK now is around 665 deaths per million, okay? They're kind of at the top of the list. The US has 447 deaths per million. These are objective data. This isn't like, you know, I'm going to dream up some infection rates because there's a spike in California in number of positive cases. Canada, we've done a terrible job. We're at 236 deaths per million. And then it just drops, okay? Germany, 110. Denmark, 106. Egypt, 45. Israel, 20. India, 23. Philippines, 17. Cuba, 8. Nigeria, 4. Thailand, less than 1. Taiwan, less than 1. Vietnam, 0. Malaysia, 0. Australia's done really well as well, and so has New Zealand. But New Zealand, look, there's 5 people and a bunch of sheep, okay? So that's a joke, but I mean, New Zealand is, first of all, a country that is isolated, and secondly, has a low population. It's not a very big country. I mean, it makes Canada look big population-wise, and we're less than 38 million people in Canada. But the Prime Minister of New Zealand did a very good job. The one thing, all of the countries that I just listed who have done a good job, including Egypt. See, I see Egypt as doing a good job when your death rate is at your death per million rate is at the numbers that you're talking about, okay? They shut down their borders right away. That was it. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it was a conservative government. It doesn't matter if it was a liberal government. It doesn't matter if it's a military government, okay? It was shutting down your borders. That's it. Shut down the borders. And Canada, the US did a terrible job. Canada did an almost as terrible job, okay? And the worst decision we ever made in Canada was we left our border with the US open. It should have been the first border we shut down. There was no reason for the United States and Canada to be in the situation that they are right now, except for poor planning on the part of politicians. And that's it. And it irks me. It raises my ire tremendously when I think about this. Now, I live in an area where there's not very much COVID at all. I'm about 300 kilometers north of Toronto, okay? Toronto's been ransacked by COVID. But the other thing is, the ransacking around most of the world has been at old age homes, and it's only in countries that have a culture like we have in the West, where you take your old people and you throw them away into homes. Countries that have a culture where the elderly are kept in the family home have low death per million rates. Most of the deaths in Italy, like the average death the average age of dead people in Italy from COVID-19 was 80 years old, okay? And in the US and Canada, it's just wiping out old age homes and, nursing homes and this sort of thing. So I think there are some really big cultural differences. And in fact, a friend of mine and I are about to do a study where what we try and do is categorize countries as those that are more like individualistic, like in the West, or more collectivist, like in Asia. And Muslim countries are like this as well. You keep your old people with you. Hindu countries are like that. They keep their old people within the family. And Greece, for example, Greece has the lowest in Europe, in Western Europe. And the Greeks keep their old people with them. Eastern Bloc countries, so former Soviet countries, right? Like Ukraine, Romania, who don't want to be associated with Russia at all, obviously. They don't like that idea much. They don't like, what Putin's been trying to do. He'd like to recreate the USSR if he had his own way. They're doing really well. They shut down right away. Ukraine's got about 17 deaths per million, and Romania's got about 19 deaths per million. So they're doing better than you, but you're doing well. It's, and you can't believe when they say, oh, we had more infections today. Well, we don't know what the infection rate is for the reason that I just said before, because nobody knows, because it's a fairy tale. Until they do the right research. And somebody's got to start doing the right research. At least what I found is that people in countries like Egypt, with you talking with me, Pakistan, India, all of the Pacific islands like Indonesia, Philippines, Bangladesh, anyway, all of these, or Sri Lanka, pardon me. Anyway, Taiwan, Thailand, which aren't islands, but Myanmar, all of these countries that keep their old people with the family, and it doesn't matter the religion, it matters the culture. Because, it's interesting, India and Pakistan are sort of at loggerheads with one another a lot of times over political issues, but culturally they're very similar. Is that the Hindus and the Muslims have similar traditions when it comes to family values and taking care of the elderly and taking care of the family. And it's just far different than the West. So we're getting ready to do a study to actually address that issue. And here's what I'd say. We're trying to open up the economies way too fast. Angela Merkel managed to keep the EU together under threats from two of the most idiotic world leaders out there, okay, Donald Trump and Boris Johnson. She managed to, they're threatening the EU. She kept the EU together. She's a smart woman. She knows numbers. She's got a PhD in physics. She stabilized Germany long before any of the other countries that were highly infected. She stabilized Germany at about 85 deaths per million. And it was like that for about 3 months. And then she slowly and methodically, scientifically reopened the economy, and boom, they got spikes. I don't know exactly what spikes mean because I don't know what the true infection rate is, but then she had to pull back and rein in the economy. Now, the United States, it's insane down there right now, and Brazil is pretty bad, and Bolsonaro in Brazil is a lot like Donald Trump, who is, I would argue, the biggest threat to world peace of anybody out there, okay, is Donald Trump. And that Xi, Kim, and Putin, I'll throw them into the mix as well. But Donald Trump is the worst. And I think we're going to have to, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. And people who think that we're going to have a viable vaccine, now remember, they said 18 months, okay? That was 8 months ago. So they got 10 months now to, meet their goal of a viable vaccine that can be distributed around the entire world within 10 months. If I was a betting man, I'd say that ain't gonna happen. Keeps is basically, you can't reopen. We've got to be really careful how we reopen our economies, because Germany tried it and they had to back off. And then, South Korea tried it and they had to back off. And the United States is doing it in a haphazard and potentially dangerous manner. Canada is doing it in a better manner, but I still think they're going too fast. And so we can't keep the world economy shut forever. And the people that are hurting the most right now, in a lot of senses, are the tourist operators and the restaurateurs. But the restaurateurs have found ways around it in North America. What they're doing is just takeout and delivery, right? And they can just leave it at your door, you pay by a credit card, and that's it. And so there's no possibility of transmission. And so even if they open up your restaurants and your clubs and that kind of thing, my advice is don't go, okay? If you can go to patios, like we have restaurants that are patios where all of the tables are at least 2 meters apart, and so you wear your mask in, you go to your table that's 2 meters apart from the other table, you take your mask off. The people who work in the restaurant are wearing masks. You can have your lunch or your dinner. You pay for your dinner, you put your mask back on, and you leave. But the coronavirus it's related to the common cold. It's not a flu virus like people like to, some people like to say, like Trump initially said and Baldazaro was saying in Brazil, but it does have some similarities to the 1918 to 1920 Spanish flu outbreak, pandemic, okay? And just as a quick little aside here, Spanish flu came from the United States. So you know how Trump likes to actually, call this the Chinese flu, okay? We can call the Spanish flu the American flu because that's where it came from. What happened was Spain was neutral during World War I. They didn't want to demoralize the troops. The first Spanish flu appeared in a military base in Kansas, okay? So they blamed it on the Spanish. That's how it got the name Spanish flu. It's really the American flu. So just to bash Trump a little bit here. Anyhow, it's estimated, we don't really know, but it's estimated that it took out between 5 and 10% of the world's population. Now, so far, COVID-19's taken out 0.008% of the world's population. So it's contagious, but it's not particularly deadly compared to the Spanish flu. But the Spanish flu hit in 3 waves, and they were all mostly you read about 2 waves, but there were really 3. And mostly they were in, pardon me, they were all in 1918, but the second wave was the one that was most deadly. So what we need to worry about is well, we don't know if there's going to be a second wave, but will there be a second wave? And if there is, will this virus have mutated so that it is more deadly? Because it really isn't that deadly right now. And we've got to be prepared for that. And there was no excuse for North America not being prepared. You guys were smart. You just shut everything down. Your tourism industry is suffering. There aren't people going out to see the pyramids, right? I mean, like that, you know, and it's the same thing in Canada. You know, people that operate we've got a big tourist industry that involves the outdoors and the mountains and fishing and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, they're suffering. So be safe, social distance, wear your masks, wash your hands, use hand sanitizer, and don't count on this being over anytime particularly soon until we have a viable vaccine. And you have to remember that the regular flu vaccine, okay, seasonal flu just sort of kills old people and that's it, right? And the Spanish flu, or pardon me, the coronavirus does similar things to what the Spanish flu did. Old people drops off, then 20 to 40-year-olds drops off, and then young children, but mostly old people, okay? So I've been talking with people in India, and what they're doing is, instead of doing what they're trying to do in the US and Canada and just sort of, you know, reopen, is they're developing new business models. So their new business models are safety from raw materials to final delivery destination, okay? Ensuring that the workers are safe all the way along. And you know, this stuff doesn't live on surfaces as long as anybody wants you to believe that it does. Okay, you can take, like, you know, Javex, but you can take bleach and wipe down your counter. So, so instead of saying, oh, let's, you know, just reopen everything, they're saying, let's develop new business models so that we can continue with the economy. And they're thinking outside of the box too. So, and that's going to be the way things go. I was talking with a woman in Nepal, and she exports various kind of herbs or herbs, whichever pronunciation you use, both are right, from Nepal. And she's just doing everything online. And we have organizations in North America who, what they wanted to do, they had a 5-year plan of getting out of the retail business and doing all their retail online. Well, what happened was, as soon as the shutdown hit, they did their 5-year plan in 2 weeks. Boom, offline, where everything's online now. Okay, a lot of companies did that. They're going to survive. The ones that didn't aren't, you know?
Yeah.
So we can still have a good internal economy, and we can still have a good external economy, depending on how we approach it. Because you can, like, where everything's still open for trade, it's just not open for people.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, we still have trade going back with the United States, but people who are driving trucks that come in, they have to quarantine once they're in Canada for 14 days before they can do any work and then go back to the US, and vice versa, right? So it's a whole new world out there, and we're going to have to get used to it. And then reopening schools is another issue. There's a push here to get schools reopened by September. Well, I think that's just stupid. I think these are politicians who are trying to pander to people rather than to think about the realities of life. you don't have the infrastructure set up, because you're going to have to reduce class sizes from, say, 40 people in a classroom to 12 people in a classroom, so that there's physical distancing between everybody in the classroom, as well as the teacher. And you're going to have to, everybody's got to wear masks. Universities are going to have to do all of their big courses online, because there's no way they could afford to have, like an introductory psychology class at a big university in Canada. You've got 500 students in the classroom, okay? So when you're going to break that down to, 20 people per class, how are you going to pay for that? So those things are going to have to be online, but they haven't figured out how to prevent cheating and collaboration. So, there are hurdles to overcome. And the problem is, I hate to say this, when we have a pandemic, scientists should be running the world and not politicians. So, any questions for me?
What else would you like to add to that?
Be safe. Do what I suggested. Wear your masks, wash your hands, keep your physical distancing. Now, that's harder to do in cities like Cairo than it is, like, I'm living in a small city that is only about 55,000 people 3 hours north of Toronto. And I don't plan on going to Toronto anytime soon, because my likelihood of catching COVID is probably bigger in Toronto than it is here, because they're reporting more cases. I don't even, the infection rate here might be exactly the same as it is in Toronto. That's just that it'd be a small number because there's only 55,000 people here and there's 10 million people in Toronto. And so it's harder to social distance in big cities. But you have to do what you have to do. You got to be safe, and you got to be realistic. Okay. If you think that everything's going to go open up tomorrow, you're going to be really sad and get depressed. At least the lockdowns have opened up a little bit, and there's a very good side to that. The good side to that is, around the entire world, when everybody was locked down and quarantined and you basically couldn't go anywhere except for absolutely essential services, like to buy groceries to the pharmacy, that sort of thing, domestic violence increased dramatically. So you have people that were they're together in one place for 3 or 4 months and can't go anywhere else. They start to get on each other's nerves. So opening up a little bit and maintaining the safety is a good thing, because it allows people to get out. And also, a lot of people were suffering from depression. And this is all correlational, so I don't know if this caused it or not, but allowing people to get outside will help combat that sort of thing. So be safe, my friend.
I'll do my best. It has been a great pleasure talking to you, Bob. You're so informative, so helpful, and so insightful.
Thank you very much. I appreciated the opportunity.
Thank you.